Welcome to November, everyone. This is the last official month of fall, and we do have one more month of hurricane season. If we take a look out in the tropics, it's pretty quiet now after we dealt with powerful Hurricane Melissa down there into Jamaica, 185 mile per hour hurricane just devastated Jamaica and went through areas of Haiti, through Cuba, and also into portions of Bermuda. But you can see now it's actually turned post-tropical and only the remnants is left, which will actually be somewhat felt in Iceland, believe it or not. But further south, it's pretty clear, but we do have one more area of little disturbed weather that we want to highlight further south into southern Caribbean. This could take a while to form, but there are some signs of slow development and some lower pressures trying to form down in that region. Further to the north into the U.S., we are dealing with a kind of a reinforcing shot of colder air coming in. That's going to enhance some showers along this front over the next day or two as it pushes further south. But you can take a look at the overall ensemble guidance. Yes, over the next 10 days, we do have another area of disturbed weather. The Climate Prediction Center has a 20% tag on this area. So we're going to have to watch this. We're not ultimately done yet, but we could have one more storm trying to form in the works well south in the southern Caribbean. But man, it's been a warm October. Yes, we did have a colder shot of air that came in towards the end of the month into Halloween. But overall, it was a very warm October, just like last October for much of the U.S. Here's your temperature anomalies for those 31 days. Overall, you're talking 5 to 8 degrees above average across the middle part of the country. So everywhere it was really predominantly above average. It was just really, those areas across to the west where they had these troughs much of the month, and abundance amount of moisture came in from the Pacific Northwest, which kept the cooler temperatures around to average or just slightly below average. And where we typically see severe weather this time of year is further south, down there in the southeast, towards into portions of Texas, mainly east of I-35, areas into the southeast. But we're actually seeing nothing like that right now because the overall jet stream is going to buckle well to the north as we head into that first week of November, and that means plenty more warmer temperatures on the way after we have this one last shot of cooler, somewhat colder air coming in after we dealt with that cool shot for the end of the month. Now we have a cooler shot of air that's kind of a reinforcing shot of keeping those temperatures below average of 5 to 8 degrees. But you can definitely see what we're building, this ridge of high pressure. These cooler temperatures aren't going to last that long because we do have that ridge building out west, and that will slowly push these temperatures upward as we get into next week. And overall for the weekend, it's going to be pretty dry across a good part of the country. You got to remember, we had powerful Hurricane Melissa out there in the Caribbean. This was the third Category 5. Even though this was a fairly quiet year, we always talk about it only takes one storm, and that one storm was obviously Melissa, and it came with a vengeance, and that will certainly be a retired named storm. But what it tends to do, these have so much energy that it just takes all that energy out of the atmosphere. So what's left is much drier air moving in for a good part of the United States for not just the weekend ahead, but for much of next week. The only rainy part is actually going to be in the Pacific Northwest, where we've got these conveyor belt of moisture coming in, which will keep the coastlines, at least, of Washington and Oregon and Northern California on the predominantly wet side and windy side. But if you get across the middle part of the country into the desert Southwest, much of the central U.S., you're not going to really experience much transition at all, but just overall warmer than average conditions because of the jet stream. It's going to be well to the north. You've got this Pacific jet extension even lifting further north than what it was. So the moisture will be inundating areas of Washington and portions of Idaho and into southern Canada. But other than that, Further south, it'll be just a warmer push of air coming in and a drier push of air with the jet stream well to the north, as we've got a ridge of high pressure that will be building and expanding and dominating for a good part of the lower 48 in the week ahead. If you look at the overall jet stream on this view, by Tuesday, it's really going to be setting up shop across a good part of the country. Any cooler temperatures or any unsettled like weather will be well to the north across areas of the far northern areas of Washington and Idaho, Montana, back into southern Canada. We are going to see a little bit of a jet stream dip as we head into, say, late Wednesday into Thursday. Might bring slightly cooler air for areas of New England, but nothing too substantial for this time of year. And it's going to be windy, especially across the north where that jet stream is. Further south, it's going to be more of a tranquil week. It's going to be really pleasant, a lot of clear skies, a lot of light winds. And it's not going to be as windy as was last week. It ended up pretty windy with that jet stream dip, obviously with that colder shot of air that we came in for the last couple of days of October. But at the time we get into Wednesday, we're going to be watching another system. So it's going to be a wet weekend ahead for the Pacific Northwest, and we'll have another reinforcing shot of very heavy rain and winds along the coast. So yes, it's going to be very unsettled for those areas across the Pacific Northwest, especially the further along the coast you live, into British Columbia, back into Washington and Oregon, Northern California. But it ain't going to be pushing too far inland because it's going to run into this ridge of high pressure and this drier air once it gets into the middle part of the country. Will knock that precipitation and kind of evaporate and not allowed to be fall to the surface. But yes, Wednesday, by the time we head into Wednesday, we won't be talking about any cold fronts or any stretch of the imagination. We'll be talking about this ridge of high pressure. This Pacific air will be coming in, and that southwest wind will be dominating for a good part of the country. And that means the temperature will be going up for, November standards. So looking at this is not going to be hot of any stretch of the imagination. But where we would typically see for this time of year, it's definitely going to be above, if not well above average for a good part of the country. And as far as the temperatures look by Wednesday, further south, you've got widespread 80s across a good part of the Southwest. Much of Texas, much of the Southeast will be experiencing 70s, if not upper 70s. You got to get into the northern interior, back into Nebraska and to Iowa to get into the 60s, and going into the 50s as we head into areas of the Dakotas. That is definitely plenty warmer conditions. This is where you would typically be this time of year, near 70 there in Dallas instead of 82. So obviously that's well above average. So for a good part of the country, considering where we're going to be on Wednesday comparatively what we are normally will be, it's about 10 to say 12 degrees above average for much of the lower 48 by the time we head into the middle of the week. And again, it's going to be dry, right? So underneath that, with that ridge of high pressure, a lot of sinking air is just not going to have that lift associated with it to produce showers and thunderstorms, besides that those areas across the Pacific Northwest. So yes, it'll be a wet weekend, a wet beginning of the week, and then you'll have another reinforcing shot of that conveyor belt of moisture will be inundating the coastal lines of the Pacific Northwest. And there's the buckle in the jet stream that will only impact areas of upper Michigan, of those areas into New England. Will bring some slightly cooler air, not cold for any stretch of the imagination. You won't even get any snow out of this mix besides some of the very high mountain regions. But underneath that, it will bring some much needed precipitation because that area has definitely been on the overall drier side. And yes, there is the jet stream dip that will be impacting by Thursday. But for a good part of the country, you still got that Pacific jet extension pulling in some of that Pacific air for much of the country. So much of this precipitation from the Pacific Northwest dies as we hit the middle part of the country, and then it picks back up again with that little buckle in the jet stream off the northwest flow will be impacting areas across the northeast and into New England, especially there into Maine. And what's not really until Friday that we dip the jet stream just a little bit. That'll be slightly. That'll bring another system just slightly further south, bringing some cooler air from Canada, even, a little bit further south, but it's still much of the country will be experiencing above average temperatures. Is not really until we get to next weekend where we have a little bit more unsettled conditions, dropping a tad bit further south, Indiana, Ohio, back into western Pennsylvania. And with that other system that's coming in from the Pacific Northwest, some mountain snows likely return. So we're not talking cold for lower elevations, but cold enough to snow into some of the higher elevations above 5,000, mainly 7,000 feet in elevation with some of those mountain snows. But that won't even be until next weekend, because overall, it's still going to be a very warm week ahead with of the next 7 days heading into your work week. Much of the country will be experiencing that Pacific jet with that south and southwest wind pulling in that much warmer air. It's really just further south into Florida. We'll be trying to hang on to some of those cooler anomalies and more pleasant light conditions for them. But it's a dry week, right? Remember, Melissa pulled all the precipitation. They pulled an extreme amount of energy out of the atmosphere. So it's going to take a while for the atmosphere to kind of regroup. So this is the next 7 days, if not the next 10 days. There's just not much precipitation to work with these storm systems. We do get a little bit with that dip in the jet stream further north across the upper PA, up into New England. Of course, the conveyor belt of moisture that will be impacting the coastlines of the Pacific Northwest. But notice that once it hits in the interior regions, it more or less evaporates. And we got almost next to nothing. So it's going to be a very dry time ahead for a good part of the country, and a warmer time for the first week of November coming up. So guys, I appreciate you watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch my next update where I protect you before and after the storm.